Hi, my name's Kathy Millett and this week we're painting our brick walls. Basic painting. So this week we're doing basic painting. What do I mean by that? I mean the brick colour and that start of the patina. This has just got primer on it. But how do you take this primer coat and create something that's the base of all of these dioramas that I've been doing? So where do we start? First up, I've got my Brother Scan and Cut walls that I cut out of craft foam. And this is a great material. It doesn't react well to some solvents. So for a little bit of protection, I spray it with a solvent, with car primer. Now you can look at this and you can see these will warp a little when you first do them, but they then eventually do settle down. So I've got two sets to show you. This is O, and this is for my snow and ice lock diorama that's coming up later in the year. And these are quite easy because they're big, you can see them. If you wanted, you could hand paint them. It's just a very nice, each individual brick. It's a very nice size. This is HO. Need a slightly different technique to coat with these. There's a lot of bricks on here and you couldn't do them by hand. There's just too many. So these are all set ready to go onto my Port de Norwich dock layout. So what do I do first? Well, first I do the mortar. I've learnt the hard way that these gaps are actually very hard to get into with mortar because if you try enamels which spread easily, all of this warps. Now they do settle down if you do warp it. They generally dry flat again once all the solvent's gone, but I'm not sure what good it's doing to the foam internally. So I want to use something that dries a little bit quicker than enamels, which may stay wet for 2 or 3 days in some of these cracks. And for that, I'm going to use Tamiya paint that I've thinned with isopropyl alcohol. So this is a bottle of Deck Tan that I'd got more or less just to the bottom. There was hardly anything left in it and it was a bit thick and sludgy. So I added half a bottle of isopropyl alcohol, 99%. And it's really easy then to get it to go into all the gaps because that isopropyl alcohol just cuts through and everything spreads. So a good little shake, and I'm just going to cover everything with this, and you can see it goes nicely into all the gaps. But also you can see it covers the surface, and this is why I do it first. If you do this second, then all of the paint that you've just put on the top also unfortunately gets covered and it can get rid of all that good work that you've been doing. Now if you spend too much time spreading this, it'll probably start bringing the paint underneath off. Isopropyl is quite a big solvent, so just get it on there quickly and it fills them all up. What you'll find with acrylics, and I've spent quite a lot of time, you can tell, testing this, acrylics or any other kind of solvent, quite often they don't get into these quite deep gaps that I've got here. So there's options on that. I could have cut this out of a different coloured foam, so that it was nice and light and I didn't have the problem with it being too black in there. And maybe in future I'll use grey. That would be quite a useful colour for your mortar, or you could probably find a beige or something like that. And it goes on just as easily onto the HO here. It just adds a nice colour. This is actually the colour a bit stronger I'm going to use for all my stone brickwork. Is it stone brickwork? Stonework. So there we go, and I'm just going to carry on and do this on all of them. And it doesn't matter if you put it on quite thickly, you are going to paint over the top of it. You can go through and put a second coat on if these aren't quite the right colour mortar for you. So if they're still looking a bit dark, now is the time to get the mortar the colour that you want. It's very hard to go back afterwards and add more layers to the mortar because it's the lowest point of all of this. So always make sure this mortar is just as you want it when you finish now. I would like to put a little bit more on. So what I'm going to do is, on this one, I'd like it to be a slightly browner one. So I've got this JGSDF brown. It's a Tamiya colour and I like it. So I'm going to thin this out, and I find really useful for this shot glasses. Really good. So you just need to pour a bit of paint in, and you can see the kind of proportions I'm going to use. So a smidgen of paint. It's worth buying the bulk bottles. I go through so much of this now. I've got a resin 3D printer, but so you can see there's a smidgen at the bottom and about, there we go. Let's see how that looks. And then just see how that looks. It's quite thin, and it will just make sure it still goes into everywhere. There we go. It's still a bit damp, this, but I don't mind if the two mix, and that'll just flow in nicely and give it a bit more colour. have made this a bit thicker actually, because it's going on first. Right, before we do anything else, I now need to leave all of these to dry for quite a long time. There's a lot of solvent on here, and I don't want any of this being brought off by my next stage. And because some of these solvents do get into the foam, I like them to totally get out of it again before I seal them in, perhaps by mistake, by putting on the next layer. Well, that's all nice and simple. Now we've got to do the brickwork, and I've got two techniques. On the O scale, I'm just going to dry brush the colour on the top, and that's what we're going to do first. On this one, we're going to use a sponge to do a similar technique. It's almost like dry brushing, but with a slight more texture in it. So let's start with the O scale. Now, blue brick is a complex colour. I'm sure there is a Vallejo colour that's perfect for it, but I don't happen to have it. So I've been using a mix of French Mirage blue, which is a lovely grey. So I put about, I don't know, 20 or 30 drops of that in. And then I put 4 drops, 1, 2, 3, 4, that may even have been 5, of a black, just to darken everything. It gets a bit too light otherwise. I need a bit of blue in here to blue it up. 1, 2, 3, 4 drops of blue. Needs a bit of purple. Haven't shaken that. I've got this as Tamiya, not Vallejo. You could do this with craft colours just as easily. Acrylic paints, they'd be just as cheap. That's a bigger dab than I wanted. Sort of a dab. And just give all this a bit of a mix up. And see what the colour looks like. Does that look like the colour you want? Does it look like the colour I want? I think I actually want a little bit more purple in there. Quite a rich blue, and I haven't mixed very much, you'll see, and that's because I'm dry brushing, so my brush is going to be mostly dry. Just 2-3 drops more of the blue. So another 3 drops of blue. 2, 3. There we go. Now all I have to do is remember which bits, and I can take this off at this point to get it more easily, which bits are stone. So the plain bits, as you might see here, are generally stone, and I'm going to paint those separately at the end. So you just want to, preferably doing it up and down really, just want to drag this on and make sure you leave the mortar there. You do not want too much on your brush or you will just cause problems. And if you do it from a couple of angles, you will catch all the bricks. Turn it over to do the other side. That's my blue all painted. Job's a good one. So that's it really for the blue walls, except for this one. This one has some red bricks in it, so I'm going to paint those by hand when I do the dock walls, which have got red brick. That simple. It's literally 1 or 2 coats of mortar and then a dry brush coat. Now, I am weathering these next week, so this is just the base brick colour. For these though, they're very mottled bricks, and just dry brushing it really wouldn't work. It would just look a bit boring. So what I'm going to use is a sponge, and you can see I've used this sponge before. And I'm just going to put on a variety of different colours. Again, just using acrylic paint and a dry brushing type of technique. So I'm going to start with Tamiya Orange, because it's a brick. And the first coat is always quite a bright one, the first coat, because you cover it almost completely. So orange, and then about an equal amount of red. You just need to mix it slightly. So it's quite a darkish, reddish mix at this point, and that's fine. We're going to put loads of different layers on. It's not too thick, not too thin. And now all I need to do is take my sponge. Now this is a natural sponge. You can use cosmetic sponges, you can use fine ones. This is just a little bit coarser, and I know it's natural because it's got little bits of animal in it, which I'm not entirely sure about. So I just take my side of my shot glass and just splodge it, and actually splodge it out on here so there's not too much. I don't want it to be thick. What I want is a sort of a light pattern, and then I'm just going to splodge it around. And this is my darkest colour almost, and it's effectively doing individual bricks for me. As you can see, it's quite a good covering, otherwise you're going to end up doing 20 coats. Now remember, you don't want this to be so dark that it fills in your mortar layer. And over here I splodged it a little and it's too much paint on it and it's gone down into my mortar layer. That's not what you want. I mean, it's okay in one or two places. You want to make sure that it's sitting on the surface and you can still see all your mortar lines in the colour that you've put in there. Right, I'm going to do the blue. Again, just pound it off. And try and get the gaps if you can. So this is just blue brick going in. We don't really want any grey. This is where if you've sprayed it a red, it makes sense, because whatever you do, you've always got your red as your base colour. So if you don't cover everything, it's fine. But what I was finding was my mortar wasn't particularly showing up. So I was trying to put the grey on to just get the mortar to show up a bit more. So it's all swings and roundabouts really as to what base coat you do can have quite an effect on the colour of the brick. And obviously you'll all have slightly different brick patterns that you're trying to or colours that you're trying to match. And the eye isn't going to know that your splodges are not on a definite brick. It just knows that there's multiple colours in there and there's bricks which the mortar outlines so that it can see that there's individual bricks there. So I'm just going to put a bit of whole red in, which is a sort of reddy brown really, more on the brown side. It's quite a dark maroony red and it just adds a slightly different tone. Oops. And again, that's about a quarter, a third of the amount that the others would have had in them. And we're back to splodging sponges on our red brick. So dip it in, splodge it out. See, it's a much darker colour. You can wear gloves if you don't want your hands to get as dirty as mine are getting. Now this is a bit finer because it's getting a bit softer. I have actually just taken a lot of the paint off. So the trick is to try and fill all the gaps that you've already got, but the final coat, which is going to be a paler brick colour, will kind of glaze over the top because it's hard to catch everything with a splodgy technique like this. Okay, I've now got a really splodgy brick wall. What to do next? I need to tie it all together, and I need to do that obviously with dry brushing, or I'll just go back into my mortar lines. So what I'm going to choose is a really medium light colour, and I don't want it to be too thick or I'll just paint over everything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a splurge, technical term, of this paler one in here, and this is now quite thin, you can see. So what I really want to do is make that a sort of an orangier colour, and I'm going to add just some little bit on the brush into here. Not a huge amount of colour on it. It's kind of a brown colour at the moment. I need it to be a bit more bricky. So another half brush swept in. And that's really thin. So I'm going to put a little bit more in. And I'm just going to, just like before, dry brush it, but over the top. And I don't want it to go into my mortar line, so I'm going to make sure I've brushed most of it off. And actually, I might just take these and I'm going to sweep it down over the top, and it's just going to fill in a kind of muddy colour, and all those other colours underneath are just going to shine through. Now it actually will dry a little bit clearer than it looks. There we go. So I can see my individual bricks coming through. Everything's knocked back a little bit. My mortar lines are still there because I've dry brushed and I've left them in place. All in all, 3 easy splodges. There was an orange, a brown and a blue, and then a sort of brownish coat to just knock it back to the slightly average colour. And it looks like each of them have been individually painted bricks. And they aren't. Really simple. So on this one, this is the blue one, I was going to paint some individual bricks in, just in other colours, because this one here does actually have a variety of colours in it, in this sort of central area. Now the problem with bricks is painting them randomly, so you just need to think a little bit about that. How random are your paintings? Now I know this because I've got pictures, and it really is important that you look at pictures of wherever it is that you are modelling. You know, bricks are really different colours around the world, and even from house to house, especially in modern developments, Now you can't really paint individual bricks in HO, which is a shame. I have done it. It is very time consuming. It's time to put on a good movie and just enjoy yourself. I find painting quite therapeutic. So don't be scared to try it, just don't get too carried away with it, would be my advice. So now I'm just going to paint the stonework, and for that I'm going to use XF Deck Tan. So I'm just going to use this as a bit of a glaze over here just to get the colour that I want, and try not to get it into the mortar lines at all by putting too much on. And the grey's already there, and that's one of the advantages of having started with a grey coat, that actually the colour that I need is 90% there anyway. And that's it for the basic paint jobs. Next up, we need to add the weathering, but I think that's a future video. In the meanwhile, here are some close-up photos of those brick walls. Thank you as ever to my patrons who support me and for all of you watching this. If you're interested, there's more details on my website, or subscribe to my channel to get the next instalment.